Thank you, Marcy. Good morning, everyone. Thanks for joining us. I went backwards instead of forwards on this, and here's our disclaimer. So, as everyone knows, or I suspect everyone knows, that there have been many high-profile construction site fires this year. I'm the administrator of the Construction Fire Safety Coalition, and I track multifamilies around the country. And we have a record year. It's a record no one wants to break in the number of multifamilies that have caught fire during construction. So we wanted to have this panel discussion, and the format is going to be that each one of the panelists are going to do a short presentation of about 20 minutes. And then after the three presentations, we're going to open it up to questions. There's a lot of expertise on this panel that you'll hear about when I introduce everyone. My name is Ray O'Brocki. I am the manager of Fire Service Relations for the American Wood Council. Let's go over learning objectives before we get into introductions. We're going to talk about some model codes and standards relevant to fire prevention and construction fire safety. We're going to talk about a model fire plan, which is required for construction sites. We're going to identify some best practices regarding site maintenance during construction, storage of hazard materials and other activities on construction sites. And then we're going to discuss strategies for fire suppression on active sites. Okay, so that's me. Before I became the manager of fire service relations with the American Wood Council, I did 23 years in the Baltimore City Fire Department. I was the fire marshal, fire official. And then I retired and became the chief building official for a little city outside of DC named Rockville, Maryland. It's where the Consumer Product Safety Division is housed, among other things. And now I am the manager of fire service relations for the American Wood Council and the administrator of the Construction Fire Safety Coalition. All the panelists today are members of the Construction Fire Safety Coalition. If you're interested, we have a lot of resources on our website, which is constructionfiresafety.org. You just Google construction fire safety, and that'll be one of your first things to come up. So let me introduce our panelists today. First up will be Chris Towski. He's a fire lieutenant for the city of Cambridge, Massachusetts, with over 24 years of service. He spent over 12 years with the Fire Prevention Office, where the primary duties were to enforce state laws and codes related to fire prevention and protection. I think what makes Chris particularly qualified for this panel discussion is he's a master electrician. He's a licensed electrician and construction supervisor in Massachusetts. He has been his department's electrical safety officer for almost 12 years. I think that's important because if you look at the Campbell report that came out in 2020, February, while electrical wasn't the #1 cause of fires, that and arson amounted for the biggest fire losses. 75% of all the fire losses were in fires that started either with electrical or with arson. He's been the department's electrical safety officer for 12 years, and he is instructed on various electrical safety topics. He also instructs at the National Fire Protection Association, NFPA, with their photovoltaic and battery energy storage systems safety training. He's a technical committee member representing the IAFF on the NFPA 241 committee. And if you don't know what NFPA 241 is, which I gather most of you probably do if you're on this webinar, it is the standard for safeguarding buildings under construction and demolition. He's also on the technical committee for 1620, which is the pre-incident planning standard. He's also served on NFPA 3 and 4 that deals with commissioning and integrated testing, NFPA 18, 18A, which basically is water additives and fire control and vapor mitigation. He's been on NFPA 1150, 1155, stationary energy storage systems. He is the standards technical panel member for UL 9540 and 9540A. In addition, he is the current president of the Fire Prevention Association of Massachusetts, which is also a partner with the Construction Fire Safety Coalition. He's a member of the Society of Fire Protection Engineers New England chapter, Automatic Fire Alarm Association of New England, and National Fire Sprinkler Association. He is also a member of the Associated General Contractors of Massachusetts He has presented at the NFPA, the conference, the Congressional Fire Service Institute, and other locations across the country. In fact, right before COVID hit, Chris and I presented at the Fire Code Academy in Columbus back in February. It's the last time I got to travel. He's been published in Firehouse Magazine with an article on fire safeguarding construction. Our second panelist is Joseph Cervantes. He's been working in the fire protection and life safety field since 1996, beginning his career as an installer and progressing through the field ranks to become a project manager and operations manager for two very large organizations in Southern California. He's moved his talents to the manufacturing world to bring about a change to the level of integration opportunities available to all of the life safety industry and innovative products and modifications to many of pre-existing methodologies of installations, as well as emerging technology advancements. He's going to be talking about some technology that is available to help safeguard construction. His experience includes the management of projects in all vertical markets from K through 12, higher education, government, commercial, residential, high-rise, and clean room application. Joseph serves as the treasurer for the Society of Fire Protection Engineers in San Diego, secretary of the board California Automatic Fire Alarm Association, and is on the FCAC, the Fire Code Action Committee, Construction Fire Safety Working Group. And our final panelist, many of you might know Rob Neal from his time at the National Fire Academy or when he was with the ICC. But nowadays, Mr. Neal is the owner and principal of Integra Co-Consultants. This is a Maryland-based firm that provides construction co-consulting, plan review, and training. Previously, he was the International Code Council's Government Relations Vice President for National Fire Service Activities, where he coordinated efforts to get the U.S. Fire Service more engaged in code development and enforcement process. And that is a big job. That's a big gap to fill. Rob also served as the Deputy Superintendent for the United States Fire Administration's National Fire Academy in Emmitsburg, Maryland. He was responsible for the development of curriculum aimed at improving the professionalism of America's fire service. Mr. Neal, for 6 years, managed the National Fire Academy's technical fire prevention curriculum, including fire inspection techniques, prescriptive and performance-based fire and building code interpretation and application, fire protection systems, functions, design, installation and standards, and plan review for fire inspection personnel. In 2012, he received the FEMA Administrator's Award for Innovation for his development of the popular Coffee Break Training Series. For those who don't know what that is sort of short articles that you could read probably on a coffee break about various topics that affect the fire service and public safety. And I'm a subscriber to it, and I read them, and I look forward to getting those. Mr. Neal represented the U.S. Fire Administration in an analysis of the Fire Department of New York's comprehensive building inspection and data analysis system in 2009, and the Federal Emergency Management Agency's World Trade Center Building Performance Assessment Team in 2001. He has more than 30 years of experience in Washington State Municipal Fire Protection as a fire chief, fire marshal, and firefighter. He served as charter member of the National Fire Protection Association's Technical Committee number 1037 for professional qualifications for fire marshal, and represents the United States Fire Administration on the Underwriters Laboratory Fire Council. Mr. Neal graduated from the Center for Homeland Defense and Security's master's degree program at the Naval Postgraduate School. He holds a bachelor's degree in liberal studies from Western Washington University. Mr. Neal has been published regularly in national fire protection trade journals. He owns a private building and fire code consulting firm providing plans review and code analysis services to municipalities and private sector clients. So this is who is on our panel today. We're glad to have them. You can see there's a lot of experience, education, and training in this group. So now I'm going to turn it over to Marcy to turn it over back to Chris Towski. Morning, Chris.
Good morning. All right, fantastic. Hey, thank you, folks. Thank you again to the American Wood Council for having me back. We did this about 10 months ago when we had a couple of discussions on shuttering construction sites that went very well. So again, thank you. it means a lot to me that you've thought enough to have me come back. What I'm hoping though with my little presentation is to have a little fun with this. So I'd like to start out with see if you can figure out where I'm from when I tell you I parked my car at Harvard Yard. So I hope there's a good 600 chuckles going on right now. Yes, I'm from the Boston region. I'm from the good side of the Charles River and the Cambridge side. As we go, please forgive if my overview is very basic. I know the other two panelists, they're going to be really stronger in tying in, with planning and tying in what the real problems are out there. But I'm here to give you like a more of an overview. Let's see. All right. So I'm not going to regurgitate this. I had this in there, and I didn't realize Ray was going to do so much. Oh, seemed like it jumped forward on me. Let me. All right, but we can stay here. You saw the big laundry list that I had. I put a lot of time and effort into trying to master what I do out there, and this is one of the arenas that is very, I guess, personal to me. And with the construction fire safety. And the reason is what you see here is that hard hat is I come from a construction background. Prior to me getting into the fire service, I had 10 years doing things in banging nails, and then I got more specific into the electrical trade. And then I brought that with me here in the fire service. And with my promotion, it allowed me to do some things with all my tenure in the fire prevention regulatory side of it. Allowed me to do stuff and really focus in on this. As Ray had mentioned, I'm affiliated with the NFPA. I sit on many committees, as you heard, with 241 being one of my strongest ones. When I first got in that committee under the NFPA requirements, I was under the enforcer, but now representing for the International Association of Firefighters, that's labor-based. So I'm representing labor, but there's still a big portion that is representing the enforcers because the enforcers out there are doing the labor. And as Ray mentioned, I'm the current the president of the Fire Prevention Association of Massachusetts. What we did several years ago here in Massachusetts is we made a marriage. And essentially, we became a member of the Associated General Contractors of Massachusetts because they're a big organization. And we took them on as a member of us. And that's where we can really bridge the gaps, if you will. And we've had very good success over the last 6 years here in Mass with what we've done with partnerships throughout the Commonwealth and spreading the word. Typically, when I do this presentation, I throw this out to everybody. And saw from the polling question, there's quite a few folks that sit these, whether you're an AHJ out there, a building, a fire official, or if you're a contractor in that realm. Or a consultant, I saw there was a good portion. So everybody is going to get something out of this, no matter where you sit. But the bottom line is it doesn't matter what your role is. You have to be involved and you have to have some layer of responsibility to it. So again, high level here, just showing you the United States problem, if you will. It's estimated that there's just right around 8,600 construction site fires here in the United States. Granted, a lot of them are on the smaller scale. We obviously, the things that hit the news lines. I do my own personal tracking daily, and the slide will come up next in a minute, but I'll show you what I hit on. But the bottom line is it costs a whole lot of money, and it injures a whole bunch of people. The averages out to be about 23, 24 a day out there. What you can advance it for me, Marcy. What I see more of is that we're about on a track for every 3 to 7 days. Sometimes we'll have a wide stint, we might go 10 days, where we're seeing something that hits the news lines. Unfortunately for me, what happens is we get a lot of shadowing. What I mean by that is we get our seasons where we have a lot of wildfires. So trying to do a search on fire, a lot of things get focused and the focal point all go to the wildfires, and then whatever might be taking place construction-wise is getting a backseat if it's showing up at all. But this here, what you're seeing is the tracking I've been doing over the last 5 years, and here it is already. We're the 14th day into the new year, and we already had our first one in Las Vegas just a few days ago. But what I want to bring to your attention, without boring you too much, is look at last year alone. Last year, we had 89 construction site fires. I actually think this might be off a little bit, but we had 89. We'll leave it at that number for the time being. So we encroached pretty much where we were for 2018. I actually think we exceeded it. But you can see we had more fatalities, and this is going global too, not just the United States. This is going worldwide. And we've had a bunch of injuries. What's key here, especially here in the United States, we had several months of closing down of construction sites. So even with the closing down period, we were still able to maintain those numbers high. So we got to really look at this holistically and say, we have a problem. Granted, construction site fires are small on the whole fires problem out there, but it's still a problem, and the problem's growing. So we really have to put more focal point into it. And once again, Joseph's going to go over like the causes and stuff that are more popular out there. All right, you can advance for me, please. But wood is not the enemy, and I know this is specific for the Wood Council, so I'm sure that they like the feather in the cap there, but we got to really look at this. Wood's not the enemy. It's just something that we have to live with, something we construct that we use, and if we look the reality side of it, wood is needed because it keeps us in a much greener place with what we got going on in our environment out there. And this was the Las Vegas event that took place 7 days ago. All right, advance, please. So, like I was saying, we live in a world where things burn. It's our job to figure out what we're going to do to break the fire triangle. And when we look at the fire triangle, the theory is real simple here. There's 3 elements. We all know that it's the oxygen piece, we have the heat source, and we have something that's going to burn. We can't control the oxygen part, but we can do a much better job separating out the heat sources and the fuel. It's all coming down to housekeeping and management. Advance, please. All right, so we kind of have 2 parts of what we really need to involve with fire safety. Yeah, we all want to look at this prevent fires from starting in the first place. Yeah, that goes a long way, but some of it we can't do. I know myself, I'm in the Northeast here. 4 to 5 months out of the year, we're dependent on heat to stay warm and to keep things drying timely for the construction piece to it. So that, it's nice to be able to have the magic wand to wave to say, yep, let's put all our enforcers out in the streets, and we're going to cite people or whatever the action is going to take. We're going to stop this altogether. But the reality is that there's still going to be some underlying things in our world that are going to make up what happens. And the bottom line is any fires that start, we just have to start getting involved with how to keep them from getting bigger. Whether it's earlier detection, earlier notification, changing our mindset of products, our scheduling, whatever the case is. And even our interactions, in training our workforce out there how to recognize things and not just hang fire extinguishers on the wall, but give them the training and the things that they need so they know how to use them. So how do we go about doing that? You can advance, please. This is what this is all about. This is our NFPA 241. This is the most current edition, the 2019. We're in the process of working on the 2022. We went from a 5 and a 6 year cycle. We're getting into the 3 year cycle. That's how the NFPA wants to do just about all their documents, which isn't a bad thing because it's able to be more blended into if folks are using NFPA 1 like we do up here in Massachusetts, that's on a 3 year cycle and what have you. So it seems to get into a place where it'll flow better. So the most current edition can be adopted into that cycling swing. Mass, we're a cycle behind. We're using 2013 currently. We actually have a little conflict even within our own codes up here. We run a building code and a fire code, and both, our building code actually references the 2009 edition of 241, where the fire codes reference 2013. But nonetheless, the way we worked it out up here through our statewide fire partnership is the fire side wins, if you will, if you want to call it that. And the 2013 is the one to follow. So we got 4 pretty essential steps here, if you will. Finding the code. Now, seeing most of the people that are out here, the big majority were the consultants and the AHJs. We know about that. So we finding the codes aren't a problem for us, but it's going to be our job that we make sure that the rest of the world out there is able to find code. Then it goes into reading code. You know, words on paper, and we could put 3 of us in a room and all read the same sentence and all get a different interpretation of that. But it's reading the code and taking what the intent, what it was really meant to say. And that goes hand in hand with understanding the code. So we've gotten through the piece of, yeah, we can just read words on paper, but what is it really trying to say to us? And the last piece of this is the application piece. This is probably the most important piece of this. How do we apply the code? How do we implement the code? You can advance, please. Marcy put in a nice little flavor here in the heading. I had it worded a little bit differently, but I like what she put here, you know, because it goes hand in hand. My view was this is what code for the folks that are the AHJs and the consultants. And if you're in the code development process or the code writing piece to it, you get this. This is what code's intended to do. It's supposed to be nice, neat, and organized. And like Marcy put out there, just like the job site, it's intended to be nice, neat, and organized. You can advance. But this is what it looks like, right? Especially maybe for us as enforcers, getting into the industry as the first time, where we're having things dropped on us. We're trying to pick up pieces of the puzzle at a point in time and not knowing the historical piece to it. This is the contractor. I mean, let's look at construction. Construction is organized chaos. It's not, you know, intended to really be that way, but that's how it plays out. And that's how it looks to some of us. And again, none of this is to mean that the job site is disorderly on a real nastily negative side, but it's things that individuals need to pay attention to what goes on the job site. Advance, please. So who does the code apply to? This is the key. When you get into NFPA 241, the current edition, which is kind of funky, and I'll get into where we're going with the next edition at the end of this, but it's kind of funky. You got to go to the middle of the document to even figure out who it even applies to. But the street name is, it's an owner's document. Just like most things that get built, the owner is always on the fence for things. But this here, it's the owner's document, plain and simple. The owner has some rights, obligation, whatever you want to call it, where they can delegate out that authority. And that happens pretty widespread, especially I'm in an urban area outside of the Boston area. So the bulk of the construction outside of the mom and pop shops that are doing the single family or the flipping of the property, that stuff. But the ones that are taking the ground ups and the high rise and the multifaceted, multi-tenant, multi-use groups and the real complicated pieces, these things are all getting delegated out, as you know. And typically they'll fall into a platter of the construction manager, which is under the umbrella of the general contractor. There is a big swing though, because even contractors are realizing that this might not be an arena that they could have a whole lot of input in for developing. They can hopefully implement it, but the development piece, so they'll shift that off to a consulting firm. So that's why it's key. That's good to know that we got the consultants on the call today. Hopefully it'll help you folks out. Because the consultant piece will be tasked to putting together these plans, if you will. And again, Mr. Neal is going to touch more on the planning piece when it gets to his point in the presentation in a little bit. You can advance. But I want to hit some of this stuff with the contractors, because this is where the rubber meets the road, the boots on the ground, if you will. And some of the folks that have heard the term fire prevention program manager, that's what we use in 241. I believe it's fire prevention program superintendent under the ICC. Doesn't matter. It's meaning the same thing. What we're seeing, especially up here, is folks are assuming these roles, and no fault of the individual is that, but sadly, the folks are doing this and they don't have a clue of what they're doing. And maybe that's us as enforcers not letting our expectations known a little bit better. Maybe that's us in the development side of it, not putting the document together appropriate enough for folks to follow. And I'm sure, maybe it's a lot of the industry just maybe turning a blind eye and not wanting to know, because I get it. Being from the construction side of it, and I see what goes on out there, the folks that are being asked to do this are generally a safety officer, and that safety officer is charged with doing other things, and especially now with the COVID spin on how they're checking in folks and keeping that in check, so we're keeping the spread from happening. So I get it, but nonetheless, these folks are assuming these roles. They really need to dive in and master what they're getting into. Now, with that said, there aren't any true qualifiers out there. What we have is folks like myself that have put together programs to meet licensing requirements. We have some stuff here locally in Massachusetts that the way it works up here to hold a construction supervisor license, not only to obtain that, but to maintain it on a 2-year cycle, you have to get recertification. You have to get education. So we put some stuff in, but there's no mandate that folks have to go through something that is focused exclusively on fire prevention program manager. What we do see a lot now is that the folks are doing it. The word's getting out to them that the programs exist, and they're buying into that, and they're getting in and taking the programs. So there aren't any true qualifiers out there, and the training is still slim, if you will. Advance, please. Thank you. All right, so I try to break it down, and again, I'm trying to, keep the fun, keep this light, if you will. So a little play on words. So the FPPM is highlighted, going vertically on the left side of what you're looking at, and I just try to put it, in a softer tone. To be that at the end of the FPPM, you have to have that desire. You want to be free from fire. If you come in with that open-minded, good mindset, that's going to get you going in the right direction. You have to recognize and pay attention to those needs for prevention. And again, prevention could have two meanings: preventing fires from happening from the beginning, or preventing them from getting bigger. So you have to, know where you sit with that. You have to be part of the part of the program. I knew I'd get a chuckle out of somebody somewhere. But you have to be part of the program. Get involved. Yes, that plans are being sent to you and you've read them. But if you're in that development process of developing that program, you'll comprehend it much more, and it'll be a much easier rollout when you have your, what we call in the fire, so the tailgate talks, or what happens in the construction. You might have your morning safety chats or whatever it is, and you can roll it out that much more streamlined. And you have to be a boss. I get it, especially I'm imagining it's like this all parts of the country and the world, but here in the Northeast, we're having a construction personnel shortage. Most people that are, educating themselves, they're not getting into the construction piece. The numbers are much smaller. We're having difficulty filling the specialty trades like the electricians and plumbers, but there's still a lot of folks in there, but the numbers aren't as high as we'd like them to be, especially with the amount of work that's going on. And with that, we want to retain our workforce. We don't want to necessarily be the bad guy, and not necessarily you have to. If you're able to implement a little bit more proficient as a manager, you won't have to get into those 11th hour or those face-to-face one-offs where you're put in a box and you have to do something, because you'll have your expectations be known up front, and hopefully you'll have that workforce that'll have that mindset that want to work along with you with that direction. Advance, please. All right, the plan, again, as I mentioned, Mr. Neal is going to give you a wonderful presentation and touch on planning and stuff. But again, another play on words. This here I left in here for myself is, we're at a point, especially up here with our 6th year of really implementing that up here in the Northeast, and certainly out of the Boston area, and certainly through my own eyes. The fire service view, we're being handed multi-pages of plans, which is great. That all needs to be submitted, maybe a part of the building permit process, the way we, walk that dog up this way. But as far as knowing what it transpires into something that's from the enforcer side of it is, I know what the words, I know what 241 means, I know what that section means. What I'm looking for now is the punchline, is looking for the 1-2 page, the high level, the timeline, I'm not looking for every day what's going to happen. I'm looking for significant changes, what's going to happen. If we can put it together and lay it out in a nice chronological order, I'm finding, me personally up here, that the spreadsheet format is working. It can pull things out in color coding and pull out things on different time periods and different activities, and I don't know, it goes all ways under the sun, where personnel are going to be and what the activity is going to be. Of course, you can hone in on where your hot work processes are or where your heat sources are. So there's many ways to do that. This format may help you where you can articulate it out to folks that everybody can have that same viewpoint from, and we can all be on the same page. And one of the keys here, though, it's not a stagnant document. It needs constant updating. Early on, the way I would try to paint the picture, it's like a baby. You can't just have the baby and expect it to take care of itself. No, it needs attention to get through certain stages of its life till it can be, an adult, when the building can be built and ready for certificate of occupancy. But through that whole period, it's growing, it's changing, it has different needs, and that's the same thing with the planning. Advance, please. So implementation all points back to that. It has to be flexible, modular, and expandable. This is probably the most difficult part, and good luck to Rob on this, on how he's able to portray words on a paper that have life, because it is a living document. Just like that analogy I just gave of the baby, from the time it's born to the time it's an adult, of all the things it has to go through. Advance, please. All right, so fire service enforcement. Let's see now. We'll start poking the ribs of some of our enforcers out there, especially if you're on the fire service side. 241 makes it kind of very clear. The only thing that should be asked of the fire service is just a consulting. In other words, just to get an insight, a bird's eye view, if you will, of how that fire service must operate, to see what their specific needs might be. I'm starting to spread the message now, as I get more and more, and as we grow together up here in the Boston area. I'm asking these ownerships and developers and contractors now, how many of you have ever gone to your local fire service and said, hey, if I'm going to build something, and let's say it's going to be all wood construction, and I'm out in this remote area, do you really have enough resources? Do you have enough water supply to mitigate, to do anything? Should there be a fire? No one's asking those questions. We're still in the infantile baby step role where, hey, I'm just glad people are starting to get some plans out there, because at least now they're starting to pay attention to this. But we still got a long way to go that, as we domino this, as we spread this, we'll get folks in tuned on walking in the fire service shoes. So they'll get a good side of that. And that's how we do that on the fire service side. We're making our expectations known. Because with that, for the enforcers out there, we got to remember, only we know what we're enforcing. We like to think that many people, they know codes. But if you look at a lot, especially I see that up here, we look at a lot of individuals out there, many of them don't even have a building code with them. It's not that they never heard of the building code, but it's very seldom they have it with it, because the project is so large, so complicated, so involved, that others have filled the gaps for them. So again, when you start, sometimes, I've seen that up here. I'll be talking to somebody and trying to get my expectation known, and it's like they got that deer in the headlight, and I'm starting to realize, they don't necessarily know what I might be talking about. So we have to figure out how we're going to articulate our message. We also need to know in the fire service, others have some hardships and liabilities. This is especially with the sprinkler industry. The sprinkler industry gets a huge bashing with the woods on being a key player and not doing enough. That's fine and dandy, and there is a place and time for sprinklers. And I'll talk about them just a little bit when we talk about the next edition of 241. But outside of that, they have their own. We have to realistically know as enforcers that 60% of the damage is from a accident with water on a construction site. So that's why they're hesitant, not completely why they're hesitant, but that's why they have a little hesitation, because their own insurance carriers are advising them, hey, you turn something on, you own it. So that's why they're a little bit stuck, if you will. But if we as enforcers start understanding what that looks like for them, and we can piece it together, then we can start getting through how we're going to overcome that. Enforcers, I get it. Nobody on our end wants to get this wrong. You know, we're expected to, here's the book, these are the rules, this is what you're supposed to do. And you know, how it has to, what it needs to look like. And we got to understand that we have to accept less as being more and think outside the box. You can advance. So with that, the next edition piece, we're into this huge reorganization side of it. We've moved some chapters around. We took some things that were in two different places and combined it. We really cleared it up. We defined what FPPM means. We spent a lot of time on sprinklers. I won't bore you, but you know, you can look at what we've done through the terror review with the NFPA for the next edition side of it, or you can wait till the 2022 comes out. We've added a chapter for large wood, which is key for why we're having kind of this discussion today. And we put a lot of emphasis onto the program. And again, once again, with that, especially with the sprinklers. And that's what I have for you folks. You can advance. I thank you for your time. This is how to get a hold of me. Thanks, you.
Thanks, Chris. Appreciate it. If you have any questions, type them in the chat box, and we'll during the question and answer period, we will get to those questions. So now we're going to move on to Joseph Cervantes with our second topic. Take it away,
hey, everybody. Yeah. Can you hear me? Everybody hear me okay?
Yep. Hear you fine.
Awesome. Thank you for having me, American Wood Council. I'm very passionate about this topic. As Lieutenant Towski, we talk pretty frequently. I think we started our conversations a few years ago, just connecting with one another on social media. So, you know, it's a very big agenda item, and I wanted to kind of go through some of the history and things that we've seen and that's gotten us to this point, and then point back to you some resource allocations that you can use as an individual to you know, perform some of the things that Mr. Towski was talking about with inspections, as well as new technology that I think is really going to move the industry forward. So we'll go through legislation as well. This is an image of the Da Vinci apartments in downtown Los Angeles. This happened in 2014. That is the outer shell that was left after a massive collapse right in the heart of downtown LA. And so why are fire risks increased on construction sites, and what standard can we use to help? Move forward. So the standards for safeguarding constructions, alterations, and demolition, NFPA 241, as Lieutenant Towski hit on. There we go. So NFPA 241 has the technical committee, and that technical committee went through and they did a review of the annual averages of the fires that had happened between the years 2014 and 2017. You can progress forward, please. And in that report, they showed that the residential fires they were the superseding leading causes in construction fires for projects that were under construction at 2910. You can continue. They broke down those incidents, and this is where we're going to get into specific fire protection. So, you know, if we're talking to NFSA, we're talking to contractors, they're saying, well, where are the areas in a building that I have to be focused on? And what I really wanted to point out with this is look at the element of what causes these situations. Cooking equipment, electrical distribution and lighting equipment, heating equipment, and then intentionally set fires, right? Those are the most precedents. And then everything below that, you can see where we have regulation in place, hot work, fire watch after hot work, spontaneous combustion. Those levels are so much lower because there is so much regulation and oversight on them. But look at all of the human element, and it fits in kind of nicely with what Lieutenant Towski had mentioned, which is the human introduction of accelerants, cooking equipment. They're still cooking on construction sites. There's still issues with electrical distribution, temporary lighting. We got these massive panels going in, temp lighting panels. There's no protection. These are structures that are standing for 2+ years without water protection. And that's a serious issue, especially when we're talking type 3, 4, and 5 construction, right? And so we can really focus and harness our attention on these specific locations to make sure that when we're putting fire protection methods in place, we can allocate it to the right area to slow down the progression of the fire. We may not be able to stop them, but we can slow them down a little bit with water or proactive alerting detection. So we can move forward. The elements are broken down even further. As you continue into the report, I ask you, code officials, everybody that's on this call, please look for NFPA 241, the report that came out. This was in February, and it's just a great report to look at, really isolating where these locations are. You can move forward. Again, it continues to go down into the human element of power cutting tools and the different things that are starting the fires on the lower end. But you can see the averages there of just new construction with 3,840 fires in those per year as an average in those 4 years. Go forward. In major renovations, the leading cause in those was residential as well. I mean, that's a really big number. What does that tell you now? We have to dig into that. The causes change. Now we're using existing infrastructure, existing house panels or existing lighting panels or what have you to power the construction area, or maybe we're demoing certain areas and you know, they're not safed off properly. But you can see again, it's the electrical distribution, it's the existing systems in the building, the heating equipment. People are trying to stay warm in a non-tenable space. As Lieutenant Towski mentioned, on the East Coast, you know, you deal with that every day. It's cold and you've got to stay warm, and there's accidents that happen. And then the intentionally set fires rounds it out. But you can see again, it's a very big distribution from the human element. And then it gets even further down into where those are happening when we're talking about structural members, or we're talking about the rubbish and trash waste. I'll point out an instance here in Virginia that happened recently where a fire chief said that it was a trash chute that they actually started the incident in. And again, it's combustible material accumulation, right? So we talk the three-legged stool of firefighting. It's fire department access, water supply, and early notification, right? And so as far as firefighter access, fire department access, I'm going to hit on a couple of slides of that. Move forward. So the resource impacts on construction fires, and I'm preaching to the choir here: first alarm, second alarm, third alarm. For those of you that don't understand the resource loads that this places on the strain, think of your local communities. You have a local firehouse that can report to anything in a certain area, and then if the situation's a little more than they're capable of, they call in additional resources, backup, right? And you see it on TV shows today, call in for backup. Well, when you start getting these major construction fires, you start moving the escalation up to where it's fifth alarm, sixth alarm, seventh alarm, outside of this scale that I was able to show you here that I found in the public domain. And look at the amount of equipment and resources that this takes. 6 battalion chiefs, rescue squad, division chiefs. This is the impact on your local community, because I know where I live, I go out on the streets and I can see construction sites everywhere with wood frame construction. And if a situation happened like this in the middle of my city, the resource allocations this is going to put in Southern California are tremendous. And we have fires out here regularly, and I see our firefighters out there on the hillsides combating some of these wildfires that we're dealing with right now because of all the Santa Ana winds. So now you add the element of a situation like this with all of the different things that are happening socially out there with arsons and things that are coming at us. It creates situations like this. This is in the middle of downtown Los Angeles. You see in that image on the right, that is the background with the Department of Building and Safety and the fire department of the city of Los Angeles in that building. This was just adjacent to it. The LA Department of Building and Safety and City of LA were 600 feet. That was their building across the way. This incident, because it happened in the middle of Los Angeles, if you understand the grid pattern of our freeway systems, in the center of that image right there where it says Los Angeles, that's downtown LA. And the way our freeways run, the 10 runs to the east and west, the 101 runs to the northeast, and then you have the 110 that intersects. The 110 gets you home right through downtown. This happened right there in the X. That is just adjacent to the heart of the city of Los Angeles. There you can see the final image on Google Images. You can see how close the Department of Building and Safety was. to this structure. There's the aftermath. It was a complete collapse. There was an issue with fire department access. There's video available in public domain where you can see apparatus that had to be moved around regularly because they ran out of water and they had a hard time getting to providing that water source to the structure as it continued to burn. Remember something, this is a full-size building. I believe it was, as many stories as it was, had zero water protection in it. The fire load calculations, when we talk about ample water supply for a construction site, is based on, I believe now in the new code, 500 gallons per minute. But if you think about this, do a water calc load with a full-size sprinkler system with additional water storage on site, and now do that for a 5 or 6 story building that has zero water protection. We're running out of water, and that's a big issue. So we have issues with access. This one obviously not, because we have the freeway, but there are some in the middle of downtown areas where you are going to have that access area. 7 alarms, 70 departments, destroyed 4 surrounding buildings on this project. This project actually required more than I could put on that scale. The resource load that this had in the greater area, you can see how dramatic that was with them pulling all of the different apparatus in to support the situation as it was going. This was in Concord, California. $55 million in damage. The individual was caught jumping the security fence. 59 seconds later, it was on fire. It was on the ground within a few hours. This project was in Denver, 2 dead. It happened in the middle of the afternoon. The construction workers were seen jumping from floor to floor. The radiant heat was about 400 degrees, and it melted vehicles. I believe it was 200 feet away, the fire chief said. This was in the middle of our backyards, right here in California. This was in a residential neighborhood, Chick-fil-A, Holiday Inn, numerous buildings right across the way. Spot fires were started. The embers were massive. And we're also seeing that the embers that are coming from these fires, these structure fires that are wood frame, they're about the size of grapefruits or bigger. So they're starting spot fires. And there's one I didn't put in here, which happened in Everett, Washington. It started spot fires. It damaged the railway. It made the hillside unstable, and the building was a complete loss within about an hour and a half. This was a project in Oakland. 6 buildings, 4 of them were a complete loss. It was in the news. This was recent. This was November 22nd in Berkeley, California. The fire burned for several days. The fire department required that the building be demolished completely. The smoke was coming out of that for multiple days. So we talk about the social impact of construction fires. Obviously they're a small, disproportional amount of what's happening. As Lieutenant Towski said, there's 3 to 7 each day. We're looking at every 10 days. Wood's not the enemy, but it does get a disproportional amount of media coverage because of where they're happening. It's in the middle of the cities where people are being awoken at 3 o'clock in the morning to a fire. And all of these apparatus that are running in, and the radiant heat from this is happening in the downtown areas, and it's just causing a lot of destruction, a lot of displacement of humans. So social media, as you can understand, is going to be very negative. There's a lot of billboards and things on the outside of the contractors that can bring some negative connotation to them. The fire losses, again, it impacts people on tremendous amount of levels, from lenders and developers, owners, insurance companies. That project at Da Vinci, the developer was sued for not meeting the minimum requirements of Chapter 33 and NFPA 241/2013, which are the adopted and enforced codes in Los Angeles. And when I've talked to some of the jurisdictions, it's an educational thing. They don't even realize that it's something that they should be involved in. But it's trying to help to continue that, to make sure that the documentation and stuff is provided, and that's going to be the thing going forward with the updates to Chapter 33. So we can move forward, Marcy. Okay, so this was a project, again, social impacts. This was on Twitter. The Reno Fire Department actually posted this on their Twitter feed. This was a very interesting situation. Of the 21 buildings that are there, 14 of them were completely damaged or destroyed. The neighbors in the location there across the street started calling the police or the fire department because they heard the buildings collapsing. By the time the fire department reported to the site and they were able to get all their lines out and their engines in and to get their hoses started on, they actually, I believe they were trying to be more defensive as they came in, because there were 7 or 8 of the structures that were already fully engulfed. They ran out of water. They had to pull in additional water resources from a different feed. So they ran out of water. And we talked about access issues, and now we're going to talk about water supply. And that's a big topic that was hit on in chapter 33 when we on the FCAC work group went through with Mr. Obraki, and he's very familiar with that. Make sure you look at the next version of the IFC because there's a lot of changes going through. And the last thing I'm going to hit on, this building here was a massive 4-alarm in Alexandria. The fire chief said that these pre-construction fire systems should be a mandate. The prevailing winds, one fire started the other building across the way on fire. It was pretty dramatic. And there's video available in the public domain from that fire chief where he talks about that. That incident, you can see the imagery on the Doppler radar, the apartment building under full combustion load. The last thing I'll hit on is early notification. There's video available in the public domain that you can actually find where we talk about contractors currently using air horns for evacuation. Now think about this. You have a construction site with the peripheral of the building that's been closed up. So we close the curtain wall, we add in windows, we add in sliding doors. And the reason for that is because we want to stop the decibel level, the ambient noise level from outside coming in. So we put in additional insulation, there's wood, framing, and so on and so forth. You can move forward, Marcy, it's stuck. This individual is a contractor, he's a superintendent in Houston. He went back into the building with an air horn because he wanted to notify the people in the building that they had to get out. Contractors have hearing protection on when the decibel level is over 80 dBs ambient. It's required by OSHA 1926. And this individual had to run back as part of his obligation to notify the people in the building, and you could see him. He had to jump from floor to floor, no harness or rest system. The radiant heat was getting to him, and the rigging that was coming in, they had communication issues. The video I wanted to show you, it's very dramatic, but they finally got to him, and as they did, the curtain wall fell over. And this was in the matter of minutes. So you can understand the situation's dire. We've got to get better information out there to our contractors with technology and the legislation available to them. OSHA 1926-150 demands that an alarm system be established by the employer. All the model codes, the IFC with the new revisions, 241, 1620 for incident planning, and NFPA 1. Chapter 33, we get into the standpipe requirements, which really become a piece of artwork in the middle of some of these situations. But there is a possibility of doing pre-water or pre-final water deployment where you can supervise the water flow switch similar to what you're doing with the standard fire alarm system that's being installed, because technology allows in the equivalency factor of NFPA 241 for the local authority to use any additional systems, methodology, or devices in equivalent or superior quality over what's prescribed in the standard. And so with that, we look at where we can go into the code and the committee language that shows where these incidents are happening and saying, why don't we focus on these locations and providing protection in those areas, whether it's water or electronic systems. Ray mentioned that I wanted to introduce technology. It's absolutely something that I'm working into the model code in a proposal for chapter 33, listing with new definitions, a temporary electronic systems, because fire watch can only be in a certain area during the prescribed times. You've got 59 minutes and 30 seconds of blind spot. And if we talk about putting specific detection in locations, having a wired system in a building, it's inefficient. It needs to be maintained. The situations move and change on a job site. Something like this can provide notification appliances like you see on the right-hand side, as well as detection capabilities for environmental sensing for smoke and heat, and then provide a wireless connection offsite to alert whether it's the fire department through a UL-listed central station or the individuals responsible for the safety, such as the site safety director or the FPPM, in a text message on their cell phone 24 hours a day. And because it's spot type detection, and this system here is wireless battery powered for 3+ years, it can move with the hazard. So if there's combustible material storage in a location or some trailers or what have you, the wireless signal can propagate through the whole construction site, including where cell phone coverage cannot go to some of those electrical vaults where these fires are starting, and protect the employees, notify the public faster so that we get a faster response time from our responding agencies. And we can alert first responders, the people that are there on site, to get to these situations faster, whether it's a medical emergency or a fire emergency. And so that emerging technology is something that we're moving forward. The ball's moving very fast on that, and you know, hopefully with some of the new proposals and code variants that we're submitting, we can definitely see that change happen. So I appreciate your time. Thank you very much. And if you do have any questions about this, let me know. I can be reached through Space Age Electronics on our website at 1sae.com.
Thank you, Joseph. Appreciate that.
Yes.
If anybody has any questions, just type them in the chat box, and during the question and answer session, we'll try to answer as many as we can. And the ones we don't get to, we will send email responses to in the upcoming days. Now I just want to bring on Rob Neal to finish up the presentations before we open it up for questions. Take it away, Rob.
Thank you, Ray. Thank you very much. And Joseph and Chris, thank you both for a great introduction, covering a lot of the information that is important to all the attendees, as well as to my segue here, which is going to be covering the portion about reports. So let's see if I've got the control here. Indeed, I do, it looks like. So what I'm hoping to do by the end of this little bit that I'm wrapping up is give you an overall view of the content and the potential format for what I call a scalable construction fire safety plan. A lot of people are fearful of the fact that, gee, I have to have a 30-page document for doing a single-family dwelling, and that's not the case at all. So we want to emphasize that you really need to customize the plan to what you're using, what you're doing in your particular application. Thank you. It's important to point out that as Chris and Joseph both did, this is really an owner's responsibility. The fire code is very clear that the owner has to designate a person who's responsible for maintaining and developing and maintaining this plan. It needs to be somebody who is really responsible. It needs to be somebody who's accountable and can take care of all the things that need to happen in the development of the plan and the execution of the plan as well. Oftentimes this responsibility devolves back onto the general contractor. A lot of the contracts between the developer and the contractor have some generic language in them for fire safety, construction site fire safety. And certainly that's not necessarily a problem. It's just a matter of making sure that people understand what they're supposed to do and how they have to be responsible for getting the work done. So again, this owner designated person has to be one who can develop and maintain the plans. I've seen some jurisdictions where they actually have a formal letter that transfers the responsibility from the owner onto that specific person who's doing the plan. So that might be something that you want to consider, and I can provide you some samples with that if you don't have them. So the responsible person has not only a responsibility to develop and maintain the plans, are also responsible for training the additional responsible people on the site. Now, who does that include? Does that include the general contractor? It includes the subcontractor? In some cases, it even includes visitors. Oftentimes during a construction project, you may have the architect come by, you may have the owner come by. All these people need to be aware of what they have to do. Responsible person also has to determine what the fire protection equipment needs are. What do they need in terms of portable fire extinguishers? What do they need in terms of standpipe systems? You heard Joseph talk about standpipe systems. The code does require that you have a temporary standpipe system in place once the building reaches basically 4 stories or 40 feet off the ground. And that temporary standpipe has to go up with the development of the building. So if you're getting into taller buildings, you need to have the equipment that goes along with that. And now with the advent of technology that Joseph was talking about, you're going to have somebody that's responsible for making sure that that gets taken care of as well. So in addition to this, the fire safety supervisor or the fire prevention program manager, again, whatever you want to call them, they also have to be responsible for monitoring impairments of fire protection systems. We've been looking at these programs a lot through new construction, but oftentimes when you get buildings that are being renovated, they may already have fire protection systems in them, such as sprinklers, standpipes, fire alarm systems. And it's not uncommon for those programs or those systems to be shut down from time to time. The codes, both the NFPA 1 and IFC, have provisions in them for what are called impairment monitors and impairment programs. And that should be part of your fire prevention planning and part of your fire prevention report. When the system's shut down, there's a number of people who need to be notified. The owner should be notified, the insurance company, the local fire department should be notified. Certainly people who are working in the area need to be notified when these planned impairments occur. And then when the work is done and the system is turned back in service, that needs to be notified those same people as well. And of course, the designated fire prevention manager needs to supervise the hot work permit system. Hot work is one of the leading causes of fires, whether it's welding, cutting, brazing, any of these sorts of things that either generate open flame or just general hot work need to have some sort of a permit system to control that. Next slide, please. So some of the characteristics of model fire prevention plans, and we're going to go through these in greater detail as we go through the presentation, is we talked about the fact that they need to be scalable. And I think that's really important. People tend to be overwhelmed by this term, the plan, the paperwork, whatever it might be. But if you take a look at the two illustrations there, the one on the left is a fire safety plan for a single family dwelling. It's very simple. It's posted on the job site. Tells people what to do, what the address is, where they're located, dial 911 to get some help, identifies who the project safety superintendent is, provides a little bit of information on fire safety, and where the fire protection equipment is, and how to report hazards. So that in itself is a entirely complete fire safety plan for a single family dwelling project. Doesn't have to get any more sophisticated than that. Now, on the other hand, you may have something that's much more sophisticated depending on the size of the project and how that happens to occur. And we'll go into some of those details later on. Of course, the plan has to be easily accessible. I mean, I could write a plan and put it in a file cabinet in the job shack, and it doesn't mean anything to anybody if it doesn't get reviewed. It also needs to be easy to understand. Now, regrettably, it may have to be drawn in pictographs. It may have to be multilingual, depending on what the job site conditions are. So you need to identify who the users might be and make sure they're all familiar with it. Of course, it'd be familiar to all the principals. Anybody who's involved in this process needs to have some access to or the ability to review the plan. That could be the general contractor. Certainly all the sub-trades need to be responsible to have access to it. The building code official, he or she needs to weigh in on it, the fire code official, and then the fire services as well, the first responders. Because in many, many jurisdictions, the building code official and the fire code official may not be directly linked to the fire service. It's not uncommon to have perhaps a county building official or a county or even a state control over it, and the local fire service is entirely independent from that. So you need to make sure that the plans are available to those folks who are going to be the ones who are going to be able to use it. Next, please. Now, the first thing that really needs to happen, and this gets overlooked in I think a lot of the circumstances that we're dealing with when we talk about plans, is you really need to do a hazard assessment, because not every construction site has the same types and locations of hazards. I think Joseph mentioned a project in the middle of downtown compared to a project out in the middle of, I'll say, nowhere, or out in a rural area. They may have different requirements. So one has to take a look at what the individual hazards are. That includes the type of construction, what sort of fires might occur, what sort of potential chemical or explosion hazards might occur, what water supplies are available. And I have to chuckle about that a little bit, because both Chris and Joseph talked about water supplies, but a lot of people don't realize when the fire code official is doing a set of plans, or the building code official is doing a set of plans, they often refer to Chapter 18 of NFPA 1 or Chapter 9, or I'm sorry, the Appendix 1 and 2 of the International Fire Code for fire flow requirements. Well, guess what? Those fire flow requirements that come out of the building and fire codes are based on occupied, completed buildings. Buildings that are just standing there exposed without a lick of drywall in them, without fire protection systems in them, take dramatically different water supply requirements. One of the fire issues that we saw here not too long ago was in Portland, Oregon. They estimated that they used 10 million gallons of water to suppress a fire in a building that was under construction. Now, I challenge any jurisdiction, whether it's Los Angeles or whether it's Emmitsburg, Maryland, to be able to identify where they're going to come up with 10 million gallons of water in a very short period of time. So this hazard assessment not only has to look at what's out there, but you need to look at not only the fire flow for the finished building, but where are you going to get that additional water? Where is it going to come from when the time is needed to get that water on the fire? Next, please. Again, we should talk about the responsible personnel. We're going to cover this in a little bit more later. Next slide, please. There we go. Why don't you go ahead to the bottom of the slide, please. So the plan should cover, perfect. The plan should cover who the responsible people are. Who is, who's the job site superintendent? How do you get a hold of him 24 hours a day, 7 days a week? What sort of inspection frequency should be scheduled? Joseph talked about doing daily fire watch inspections. Some of those other inspections that may be necessary might be things like checking flammable and combustible liquid storage facilities. If you have a job site that's got explosives on it, you're going to want to make sure those are secure. So there's some frequencies that need to be outlined based on what the hazard describes. Emergency procedures need to be included in the report. We'll have some examples on that momentarily. Training requirements. What sort of training has to go on for the employees and visitors to the site to be aware of what's going on? As he wrapped up his comment there, Joseph talked about having a air horn as a warning device for a fire site or construction site. You know, that may work well, but if people don't know what that air horn represents or what that signal represents, it's going to mean nothing to somebody who is not aware of it. So you got to have some training on it. Report needs to address premise security. How do you secure the site, whether it's going to be by fence or whether it's going to be by electronics or whether it's going to have personnel, guards and fire watches. It needs to address firefighting equipment and locations where these things are located. It needs to address hot work permitting. It needs to address hazmat combustibles and storage guidance, and then finally impairment plans. So you can see that as you get a more sophisticated plan, as you get something that grows based on the sophistication of the hazard assessment, you're going to be looking at increasing the contents that go along with that. Next slide, please. So who are the responsible personnel? Well, we've said this several times before. It's either the fire prevention program superintendent or the fire prevention program manager, whatever term you use under your code. It needs to be the contractors who are working on the job site, the subcontractors. Now, this doesn't mean necessarily giving the report to every person who comes on the site, but certainly each of the supervisors within these entities need to have access to it and be familiar with what they're looking at. Security and fire watch need to have it as well. Next, please. Employees, whether they're full-time, part-time, or day labor, they need to be aware of some of the elements that most directly affect them. Simple things like, do they know how to report an emergency? Do they know where the portable fire extinguishers are? Do they know to whom to report a hazard that they might find? All these things need to be communicated to the various people, the hundreds, if not thousands of people who visit the job sites. Next slide, please. Visitors, I mentioned earlier on, sometimes your visitors include delivery services, whether it's construction materials. It might be somebody as frequent as what we used to call the roach coach, the person who's delivering the coffee and the canteen services during out the day. They need to know what's going on and how to react to prevent, report, and identify fire potential problems. And then, of course, the owner, the architect, and the staff. And again, there's a whole list of people who need to be responsible for what's going on this job site and need to have access or at least be aware that that fire prevention program plan is in place. Next slide, please. So what is the frequency of inspection? Well, ideally, we'd be inspecting every time we were out there. Every time you walk around the job site, you'd be trained to be at least aware of what the potential are for hazards, what you do to report a hazard, how to get it corrected. But the frequency really, again, needs to be addressed based on this hazard analysis or hazard assessment. I mean, if you're pouring concrete or you've got a concrete slab and you're doing tilt-up concrete walls, perhaps the fire hazard is not so great. But if you're doing concrete work with combustible forms, or you're starting to put up the wood frame construction, or whatever work is going on, you're going to need to have more frequent inspections with that. So those all need to be outlined on the plan, so people need to be aware of it. You also should identify what the code official inspections are. Now, I call on-demand inspections as those being when the contractor is ready for an inspection, he or she calls the local code official, and they respond to come out and check whether something's being approved, or they have to check for an alternate method material, or they just check for the progress. That's what I call a on-demand inspection. Other inspections might be drive-bys. It might be the fire official, might be first responders, it might be the contractor, it might be the code official. They drive by, I see a hazardous condition, they have to have somebody report it. Now, the one that's really critical, I think, in this establishing the inspection frequency is the operations personnel. And by that, I mean the firefighters. Unfortunately, they are, obviously tasked with being responsive to emergencies, and that's their primary function and role in life. They also have responsibilities for conducting fire safety inspections. They have responsibilities for training. But they really need to be inculcated with this responsibility of stopping by construction sites on a regular basis, just to get a quick size up, a quick pre-incident plan in their own mind of what's going on. We recommend at least that happens on a weekly basis. It's amazing how much work goes on in a week, and how much a job site can change, particularly now with modular construction, to see how things change at a very, very rapid pace. A project being developed in my neighborhood, it was a 3-story wood frame modular multifamily housing. I took a series of photographs with it, and in 3 weeks it went from being a slab on the ground to being a 3-story wood frame building. So it doesn't take long with modern construction techniques to get things to change very rapidly on a job site. So we strongly encourage fire operations personnel to get out there and look at these sites on a regular basis. Next slide, please. So the emergency reporting procedures need to be, thank you, and the emergency reporting procedures need to be included in the plan. How do you notify not only the people on the job site if there's a problem, but how do you notify the local fire department? And typically with the international universal 911, that's the way we do it today. But there also need to be some things for the people who are on the job site. And again, this becomes more sophisticated as the project gains and grows in sophistication. How do you notify people of an emergency? What signals do you use? What recall procedures do you use, and how do you get that communicated? How do you identify what the evacuation routes are? I mean, we typically tend to think at the micro level, obviously, well, they're going to use the two means of egress to get out of the building and get out, but where do they go to get them off the job site, to get them out of the way of the fire department? Do you have a rallying point identified for the workers? Do you have a parking lot nearby or an adjacent place where they can meet and gather? Do you have some sort of a personnel accountability in place? If all the contractors and the subcontractors are meeting in this rally point, who's going to be responsible for making sure that everybody's accounted for, and that they know what's going on, and who's going to be reporting if somebody's missing? Mentioned earlier on, the gentleman who was hanging from the platform up there, he went back in to notify other people. How do they know that everybody got out? One of the first things the fire service is going to do when they get there is they're going to want to talk to somebody who is a liaison, if you will, to identify if there's still somebody in the building, because their main accountability is going to be to try to protect lives. They're going to let that building burn while they try to find somebody and rescue them. Building protection itself is secondary to that. So somebody really needs to be designated as the liaison to the incident commander who's on the scene, and that incident commander is usually the first person arriving from the fire services or law enforcement until they can pass that command on to someone else. Next slide, please. So then we have this issue of training requirements that need to be documented. The documentation includes, is the fire prevention plan in compliance with what the codes and NFPA 241 require? Are you conducting the daily safety inspections? Do we know how to report emergencies? Are the inspections of the portable fire extinguishers in place? Are the employees trained in how to use them? Do they know where they are? Do they know what to do with hot work procedures? Have they been trained in their evacuation and accountability? the fire watch duties. Again, all these things that we keep cycling through, not only do we have to do, but we have to document that there's been training that goes along with that. And so the training documentation becomes very important in protecting owner and contractor liability. We'll saying in the fire service is that if it wasn't written down, it didn't happen. And if you can't prove either through electronic records or paper records that you documented all of these features or these factors, your liability exposure is going to increase pretty dramatically. I'm working on a project right now with one of these large loss fires where the contractor who has been being accused, I shouldn't say accused, but is a defendant in the suit, is scrambling, trying to find records that he indeed trained all of his personnel on how to use portable fire extinguishers, because the fire was small enough when it was detected that it could have been extinguished with a fire extinguisher. But the allegation is nobody knew how to do one. They didn't know where they were. And without proof of training that's been documented, that's going to be an issue at hand during the trial. Next slide, please. So that is my summary. Again, a lot of it was covered very well by Chris and Joseph. So I'd be happy to answer any questions that you care to ask.
I want to thank you, Rob. I want to thank all the panelists. We don't have a ton of time for questions, but I do want to go to some questions. If we go over, we go over. If the attendees can stick with us a little bit over time, that would be great, because we do have some really good questions, and I have these three experts here. If you have to leave right at 90 minutes, you do get full credit for the CEUs. So let me dive into the question. To me, this one looks like it's directed to you, Rob. Do the requirements of NFPA 241 apply to all commercial construction projects, or is there some square footage threshold that triggers the preparation of a written fire prevention plan?
Well, the quick answer to that is yes, it does. It applies to all construction projects, not only commercial, but it also applies to 1- and 2-family dwellings. There's no scoping statement that occurs in the International Fire Code or in NFPA 1. What we're seeing, however, is local jurisdictions, because of their ability to monitor these plans and stuff, are establishing their own requirements. Some are saying not until it's over 3 stories. Some are saying not until it's X number of square feet. So I strongly encourage the person who's inquiring to check with their local fire official or building official to see where they are triggering these fire safety plans.
Okay, great, thanks. This question is directed to all the panelists. One or more can answer it. I often see corridors obstructed during construction with building materials, stacked drywall, plumbing pipes, ductwork, etc. Does IFC or NFPA prohibit this?
I'll jump right in here and say yes, and that's just a function of maintenance, not only of the job site, but that's also covered under the fire safety codes for protecting means of egress.
Okay, great. This one looks like it's directed to Lieutenant Towski. You could unmute Chris. Can you tell us about changes to NFPA 241 that are requiring fire department status boards? What is that about?
Great question. I think it's a great idea. In 241 doesn't necessarily call out, well, I shouldn't say that. We have what you're going to see in 2022. During the technical committee, when we had our first and second draft meet, and it came out in the first draft meet when we still met as a group before COVID, there was one individual in the committee that this was something very dear to them. So I'd watch for that. But I think it's a great idea. So the status board is going to give the real-time information of what's going on at that very moment, when should there be a response or whatever the case may be.
I did chime in on that. I did write a separate proposal for the 2021 IFC Chapter 33 reorganization, that part of the requirements by the safety director should include a command post, fire department command post, and referring to NFPA 241, that command post will have any of the requirements of that standard. Hopefully,
Thanks.
if the proposal passes.
This question I particularly like. It's a universal head scratcher. I'm interested in hearing you guys take on it. Why is the code committee not standardizing these construction checklists to be followed by the contractors? So what I think they're meaning is, why is there's NFPA and there's ICC requirements, and they haven't standardized these construction checklists to be followed by contractors?
They will
All
be.
right. Oh, go ahead, Joseph. I'm sorry.
No, I was just going to say they will be actually in the reorg. There's going to be a lot more teeth that the local fire official has to enforce and implement, as well as violations. There's some specific clause verbiage that was added in for failure to conduct, document, or maintain any of the requirements of the chapter's unlawful, listed as an unlawful act. So look out for that.
Okay. This is a question and sort of an editorial comment. How many house fires are started when there is no building permit? I believe that if a permit is not obtained, then the insurance company should not pay for the destruction. This needs to be addressed. So it talks about the insurance industry, which is a good question, because you would think that the insurance industry would be highly involved in construction fire safety. And from my experience, and I want to hear about you guys, I haven't seen a great deal of involvement for the insurance from the insurance industry. It seems to me that if you're willing to pay the premiums, they're willing to underwrite the policy.
All right,
Well, you meant somebody, I think Lieutenant Towski mentioned 60% of the claims are water damage, right? So there's a little bit of give in that. It's like they don't want to put water because early deployment of water could mean potential millions of dollars in damage and losses. But at the same time, now you're not taking a proactive step towards fire protection. So we see in the UK, the Joint Code of Practices, which has great amount of insurance, but the insurance industry actually helped to create the legislation around fire protection on construction sites, where they have the EN practices there. Why is it more proliferated here in the United States is a great question. I'd love to hear Lieutenant Towski, because I know he has direct involvement, as well as Rob.
well, I mean, this is Chris. I mean, we have several members on the 241 committee that represent the insurance industry. So the insurance industry is well aware of it. I don't know what their, if they respond reactively. I mean, from what I see around here, when folks now, especially trying to build the wood stuff, I know their premiums, and some of them aren't even, they have to go elsewhere, if you will, to get insurance. So the insurance has a stake in the game. I think where the question really came from was more of folks aren't playing the rules and not going to get a building permit. I mean, just like anything else, I mean, you only get caught when you get caught. I mean, you text and drive. Well, until you have the accident, that's when you get punished for it. I mean, that's how they get punished. Now, I don't know how insurance works, and that's not my purview. I would imagine, though, that they must have provisions that, well, geez, if you did something wrong, why should we, cover you? I mean, I don't know. I'm just thinking back to the days of when folks were burning cars left and right for the insurance claim to get out of the payments. The insurance caught on to that and put something in place. I mean, I don't, again, we'd have to really direct that to somebody that insures folks on that 1 and 2 family platform. But outside of that, to get to the question is, to address it, the insurance does have a stake in the game. It's in the standard and the code writing piece.
Ray, if I may jump in here with 2 comments. One
Sure.
is that one of the people asked about the consistency in the fire safety plans and the checklists. I'd strongly encourage you to go to that website, the Construction Fire Safety Coalition, constructionfiresafety.org. There's an outstanding wealth of resources there, checklists, sample reports, all the other stuff that goes along with that. So please take advantage of that if you've not seen it. It's also free to join the coalition. There's no charge, no dues. I'm not sure they even have much in the way of meetings, but it's just an opportunity and a forum to get the information out. The other thing that I want to point out is not only the insurance industry, but I had an interesting conversation yesterday with a representative of the National Association of State Fire Marshals. They have a pretty aggressive construction fire safety program as well. They go out and do a lot of face-to-face training. And at the end of that training, they do a lot of end of course evaluation, which, as an educator, I find that to be very, very valuable. What they're finding from their attendees at their classes is there is a political pushback from government officials at the local level to require these. They're finding city managers and county officials who are saying, hey, don't put this burden on my constituents. So there's another audience out there that we really need to educate. That again, we can potentially consider adding in more and more stuff to the codes, but there's some argument that the codes are already adequate. It's just the inadequate enforcement.
Thanks. Here's a good question. The training requirements for the fire prevention program manager and the qualifications to be one aren't really mapped out in the codes specifically. So this questionnaire wanted to know what qualifications should they be looking for when they're approached with someone to be either the site safety director, as according to IFC, or the fire prevention program manager on NFPA 241.
All right, I guess I'll go first. What I look for is the attentive piece to it. If the folks took the initiative and are able to follow what 241 is trying to guide them with, that's what I look for. But as far as how the training,
well, I think they're looking for like credentials, or how can they what should they look for when approving these managers?
I know that there's construction safety. ASSP is the organization nationally for construction safety individuals. It's a national organization similar to AFFA, which is the Fire Alarm Association across North America. I kind of synergize with what Lieutenant Ptowski was saying there. I think really what you need to understand first as contractors or as officials is what sections in the code do I need to look at in order to understand what's required in my local area for fire protection. You starts with your state level, and then it goes down into the local ordinances if it supersedes the state level code. Now, once you understand that, it's an implementation standpoint. You look at each individual factor of that code and read it. Does this apply to my construction site? No. There are great organizations like the American Wood Council, like the Construction Coalition, that have checklists already made up that verify that the code language is in that checklist. So all you have to do is read the list and say, does that apply? No. Does that apply? Yes. And then create a plan around that. And the code and the standard specifically 241, will tell you how to accomplish what Chapter 33 of the Building Code is looking for. So it's kind of you're self-educating yourself by reading the code, but then there are organizations that do help proliferate the information for site safety professionals.
Right, and like I said here, what we've done regionally in Massachusetts is that there is a platform for credentialing, and it's not part of the overall requirement to obtain the licensing right now, but to get your license renewed, you have to do X amount of hours in certain fields. And we have several programs that are focused on the fire safety part that are kind of the electives. They fit under one of the qualifiers. For folks from this area, if they know that it's under the workplace safety. And under workplace safety, it's a wide umbrella of what can qualify that. And we have some fire safety programs that fit that bill. So we're making progress there.
And along that same line, I noticed a small percentage of our group today was design professionals. They too are required to get training every year in health, safety, and welfare sorts of topics. So it might be a topic we could reach out to them with to let them, as the design professional, educate the owner that there is some responsibility on the owner's behalf.
Okay, I got time for one more question, but it's a big one. Should we allow type 4 high-rise buildings? Will standpipes be sized properly during construction? Exit enclosures most likely are not constructed adequately during construction. So let's take that one piece at a time. The first question is, should we allow type 4 high-rise buildings? What they're referring to is the new construction types added to the 2021 addition to the IBC, which would be tall mass timber buildings. I can answer that one. Well, they are allowed. So the question of whether we should allow them or not is kind of moot because they are allowed, and by the 2021 edition of the iCodes.
And Ray, let me dovetail into that. 241, we cover that when we went to the 2019 edition. So we started having our talks back in, oh goodness, probably 2016, 2015. That was when we first added Chapter 12. So we're already ahead of that.
And the IBC also has construction fire safety provisions that are geared just to tall mass timber buildings. And before I open it up for questions, I do want to say that there in the Group B cycle, there was a requirement added to the code that requires a special inspector for tall mass buildings, kind of like there's a special inspector for structural steel or cast in place concrete. So there is a inspector certification for tall mass timber. But one of the requirements of that special inspector that is different than any other special inspector is they are tasked with inspecting that the construction fire safety provisions of the code are being applied to the construction project. I don't know of any other special inspector that is tasked with, among their other duties, to inspect for mass timber construction fire safety codes.
I think people are going to be very happy with the new water supply and fire protection requirements in the iCode. It goes very substantially into type 3, 4, and 5 construction with fire separation distances and the requirements for that, as well as the additional water protection with flow rates. We covered a lot of that. It was a very heavy lift, right, Ray?
Yeah, absolutely. So just to get your take on, I think, the larger question about standpipes being sized properly during construction because exit enclosures are most likely not constructed adequately. I'm not sure what they mean by that part of it, not constructed adequately. I know that the codes require that any usable stairwell has to have one standpipe that's working that goes up with the building. Rob had outlined that requirement. Mm-hmm. So is there any thoughts on that?
Yeah, this is Chris. What it almost sounds like they might be discussing is temporary standpipes, because certainly what I've seen, not only in my region, but throughout, what folks in the construction scheduling, what they're trying to do is not do work twice. So if they can scheme in the permanent standpipe piece, then the calculation piece is already formulated, and the sizing for the demand and all that, even if it's going to be an interim, manual dry system. So I think that piece. So maybe they're talking more of a temporary and them not being sized right, or there's another layer here, because we do it a lot up here too because of the cold region. What's going on with some interim standpipes that take place when the stairs aren't necessarily completed, but the standpipes need to be there because there are other access points to get there. And then again, that might fall on the path of being, maybe it's a smaller design piping. But again, I'm not exactly sure what they were going on. I agree with you there, but hopefully I hit a little bit on what they might have been referring to.
Okay, and I do want to slip a quick one in because sometimes we forget, some of the attendees aren't as familiar with the codes as we are. And one person had asked if we have a sense for how widespread formal adoption of 241 is and how typically it occurs via the IBC reference. They're saying, is it adopted by reference when the IFC is adopted in their local jurisdiction?
Yes.
Yes.
Yes. That's one of the biggest problems we face with 241. Just like any good novel out there, or any novel, all kind of the good pieces are in the front. Well, the fire safe kind of pieces are all buried in the back. The flow through the ICC stuff, it's buried in the back chapters of the main body of the code, which is no fault. It has to go somewhere, but that's where it is. And then yes, sometimes you're going to be savvy, but 241 does get pulled out both between the NFPA 1 side and the ICC side, aka IFC, that's adopted by reference.
Yeah, I think that you're right. I know that Rob feels that I don't want to speak for you, Rob, that the construction fire safety chapter should be in chapter 3 instead of 33. I know it's buried in chapter 18 in the NFPA 1. And like I said, something has to go in the back, something has to go in the front. So,
well, the great thing about this is the IBC has the pointer to the IFC. The IFC in the scope statement clearly states anything that's not shown here, look in NFPA 241, and then 241 is your guideline. I think the more important thing to think about here is, where do I start, right? Like how do I look at this? And it's the model code and then the standard. The model code tells you what you need, and the standard tells you how you need it. So if you can formulate that in your mind to to know that there may not always be the pointers, and we're working on that as a fluid issue, but there is pointers currently in the model code that's adopted by most states. And if it's not, and you feel like it should, some states like California have the intervening code cycles where we can write and get some legislation passed where the state can adopt the latest revision of the code if it's approved, and add it to Chapter 80 of the reference standards. And as long as it's in Chapter 80, it's enforceable in the state. So it's a process,
great.
for sure.
So we only went over by 10 minutes. That's not too bad. Any questions that I didn't get to, we're going to compile and email the people who sent those in. Thank you for your questions. I just want to thank Chris Towski once again, Joseph Cervantes, and Rob Neal. I want everybody to have a great day.